first voice that woke me up that night wasn't an Apo's, T-human. At least, that an Apo's. That's what it sounded like. I was completely alone in the house on a quiet Saturday night when a strange voice suddenly echoed through my dark bedroom. My eyes snapped open. The room was pitch black except for the faint glow of my phone on the nightstand. It was Siri, but nobody had touched my phone. Half asleep, I grabbed it and turned the screen off, assuming it was some random glitch. Technology does weird things sometimes. I rolled over and forced myself back to sleep. An hour later, the voice returned. This time it sounded different. Colder, more deliberate. I froze under the covers as Siri responded to a sentence I had never spoken. End quote. The answer is Thursday, July 4th, 1776. End quote. The words hung in the darkness. I sat upright, staring at the phone. My heart pounded as I checked the screen. No notifications. No open apps. No explanation. Just silence. I convinced myself it had to be another bug and eventually drifted back to sleep. That happened again. The third time wasn't an Apo's, T-random. The third time was personal. I woke to Siri speaking clearly in the darkness. The sentence she was responding to was my full name. My full name. Nobody else was in the house. And Siri calmly replied, end quote, here in Apo's. That's the information I found for my name, end quote. I didn't in Apo's. T wait to hear anything else. I bolted from my room, sprinted down the hallway, locked myself inside my parents' and Apo's bedroom, and spent the rest of the night staring at the door, wondering if something else in the house had spoken my name first. To this day, I still tell myself it was a glitch. But part of me ISN and Apo's, T so sure. And that wasn't an Apo's, T even the most terrifying thing that happened while I was home alone. One winter night, around 2 a.m., I was sitting in my room playing computer games when 3 sharp knocks suddenly hit my window. Knock, knock, knock. My entire body tensed. My room was on the first floor, but when I looked over, nobody was there. I figured it was some neighborhood prankster and shut the blinds. Minutes passed. The knocking returned. Slow, steady, patient, like whoever was outside knew I was still there. My stomach twisted. Against every survival instinct I had, I walked over and cracked the window open. The moment I did, 2 black-gloved hands exploded from the darkness and shoved the window upward. A hooded figure dressed entirely in black lunged toward my room. I screamed. I swung wildly. The man kept pushing forward. Desperate, I grabbed a lamp from my desk and smashed it across his head. The impact sent him stumbling backward. I slammed the window shut just as he disappeared into the darkness surrounding our property. I never saw his face, but I still remember those hands gripping my window. Waiting. Then there was the thing on the roof. I lived deep in the countryside, the kind of place where your nearest neighbor might be miles away. One night, something crashed onto our roof. A second later, it slammed into the metal chimney. For over an hour, I listened to something moving inside it. Scratching, banging, clawing. The problem was that the chimney had been sealed for the summer. Nothing should have been able to get inside. Then the front door began rattling violently, like someone or something was trying to force its way into the house. I looked through the peephole. Nothing. No person. No animal. No movement. Finally, I yanked the door open. Everything stopped instantly. The banging, the rattling, the scratching. The night became completely silent, as if whatever had been there was suddenly standing somewhere else, watching me. Another summer afternoon, I was alone watching movies when I heard shuffling above the living room. The attic. The sound continued. Slow footsteps. Something dragging across the floor. The attic connected to my brother and Apo's closet, so I grabbed a flashlight and climbed up to investigate. 2 steps inside, I heard a wooden board creak from the opposite end of the attic. Then another. Then the unmistakable sound of something brushing against plastic bags stored in the darkness. I froze. Whatever was up there had heard me too. The noises stopped. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then something shifted again. Closer this time. I ran. I slammed the attic door shut and called my parents. My father searched every inch of the attic when he got home. He found nothing, but I still wonder what had been standing in the darkness watching me from the other side of that attic. The scariest encounter happened because of my dog, Layla. One evening, while I was home alone listening to music upstairs, I heard her barking uncontrollably. Not playful barking, warning barking, the kind that says danger. I followed the noise downstairs into the basement. Layla stood frozen in front of the boiler room door. Her fur was standing up. Her teeth were bared. She was growling at something behind that door. I knocked and asked if anyone was inside. No answer. Layla became even more aggressive, scratching and throwing herself against the door. Something felt horribly wrong. Instead of opening it, I dragged her upstairs and locked the basement door. When my father got home, he went downstairs to investigate. Before reaching the boiler room, he noticed a ladder leaning against the house beneath the basement window. The glass had been smashed. Someone had broken in. Someone had been hiding in that boiler room while I was standing only a few feet away. The police later confirmed it was likely an intruder. Had I opened that door, I might not be here telling this story. And those aren't in oppos to even all the reasons I stopped feeling safe when I was home alone. The doorknob slowly began to turn. At first, I thought I was imagining it. I lay frozen in bed, staring at my bedroom door as the handle twitched ever so slightly. Then it turned again, a little farther, and a little farther, until finally, the lock clicked open. My entire body went numb. I pulled the blanket over my head and held my breath. I didn't end oppos, T dare move. I didn't end oppos, T dare make a sound. For what felt like forever, the room was completely silent. Then came the sound of slow footsteps. Someone was inside my room. 2 long minutes passed before curiosity finally got the better of me. Very slowly, I lowered the blanket just enough to peek out. My blood ran cold. There was a figure standing beside my bed, perfectly still, watching me. The dark silhouette was only a few feet away, staring down at me as if it had been waiting for me to look. I screamed so hard my throat hurt. I pressed myself against the wall behind my bed, unable to take my eyes off the stranger. The figure turned toward the window for a moment, then calmly walked out of my room without saying a word. No ruse, no panique, just walked away. I remained frozen in that corner for nearly an hour before finally gathering enough courage to search the house. The front door was standing wide open. Whoever had been in my room was gone. I didn't oppose T sleep for a single second that night. The next story comes from a 16-year-old girl. When I was younger, there was a boy who lived next door named Joey. And Joey was obsessed with me. Every time I stepped outside, he somehow appeared moments later. If I sat on my porch, he and oppos D sit on his. If I walked the mailbox, he and oppos D suddenly need to check his mail too. It felt less like coincidence and more like he was constantly watching. He was 17, awkward, and strangely isolated. I never saw him hanging out with friends. Most days, he seemed to spend his time staring out the windows of his house. I tried everything to make it clear I wasn't oppos T interested. Nothing worked. Eventually, I told him directly to leave me alone. The expression on his face still haunts me. It wasn't oppos T sadness. It wasn't oppos T embarrassment. It was anger. The kind of anger a child shows when someone takes away their favorite toy. Except this wasn't oppos T a child. This was a 17-year-old boy staring at me with pure resentment. A few weeks later, my parents left me home alone one evening. I was sitting on my bed working on a school project when I felt the mattress shift slightly beneath me. At first, I thought it was my imagination. Then it happened again. The movement came from underneath the bed. A horrible feeling washed over me. Slowly, I leaned down and looked underneath. What I saw made me scream. Joey was lying there. His eyes locked onto mine from the darkness beneath the bed. For a split second, neither of us moved. Then he started crawling toward me. I ran. I bolted from the house and sprinted next door, repeatedly ringing his family and oppos doorbell. When his parents answered, I told them Joey was hiding under my bed. They looked terrified, but Joey never came out. That and oppos. That's when I called the police. His parents begged me not to. I ignored them. Officers searched my room and found him exactly where I and oppos D left him. Still hiding. Still waiting. During questioning, Joey admitted it was an oppos T the first time he had hidden beneath my bed. Police later discovered dozens of photographs of me scattered throughout his room. The worst one showed me asleep in my own bedroom. The picture had been taken from inside the room. I still get chills thinking about it. I grew up in a remote rural area where being home alone was normal. One hot summer afternoon, I was lying outside tanning when I noticed a man standing among the trees at the edge of our property. He wasn't moving, just watching. I sat up immediately. End quote. "Can I help you?" End quote. I shouted. The man slowly emerged from the woods and walked toward me. He claimed he lived somewhere up the hill and needed help fixing a broken water pump. Something about him felt wrong. Every instinct in my body told me not to trust him. I lied and said I was leaving soon. The man stared at me for several uncomfortable seconds before turning around and disappearing back into the trees. As soon as he was gone, I folded up my chair, went inside, and locked every door and window. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. About an hour later, I remembered D left my sunglasses outside. After checking carefully through the windows, I stepped outside to retrieve them. The yard appeared empty. Relieved, I started searching through the grass. When I finally found them and stood up, my stomach dropped. The man was back. This time he wasn't standing in the woods. He was hiding behind our shed. Only half of his body was visible. The other half remained concealed behind the corner, watching, waiting. The moment he realized D seen him, he didn't move. He simply continued staring. I yelled that I was calling the police and sprinted back inside. Officers arrived shortly afterward and took my statement. Fortunately, I never saw that man again. But knowing he returned after I told him no still terrifies me. The last story happened when I was only 7 years old. I was staying at my grandmother and Appo's house during summer break. My grandmother never drove anywhere. Instead, she walked everywhere, no matter how far away the destination was. One afternoon, she decided to walk all the way to the library several blocks away. Before leaving, she gave me one simple instruction. End quote. Don and Appo's. Open the door for anyone, end quote. Then she left. Being a curious kid, I spent the afternoon watching television. A little while later, the phone rang. Without thinking, I answered. A man in Appo's voice came through the receiver. End quote. Who in Appo's this? End quote. End quote. Danny, end quote. I replied. End quote. Are your parents home, Danny? End quote. Ikot. No ikot. End quote. So you and Appo's home alone? End quote. End quote. Yes, end quote. There was a brief pause. End quote. Where do you live, Danny? End quote. I innocently told him. The man simply said, end quote, goodbye, Danny, end quote. Then he hung up. At the time, I didn't in Appo's think much of it. About an hour later, someone knocked on the front door. I remembered my grandmother and Appo's warning and stayed on the couch. Then a voice came from outside. A voice I immediately recognized. End quote. I can see you on the couch, Danny, end quote. My heart nearly stopped. I looked toward the window. A man was standing on the porch staring directly at me. And somehow, he already knew exactly where I was sitting. The man standing on the porch looked terrifying. He was large, unshaven, and dirty, with a thick beard covering most of his face. His clothes looked worn and stained, and his eyes never left me as he stared through the window. Then he smiled. End quote. I and Appo's, you got some candy in my truck, Danny, end quote, he called out. End quote. Why Don and Appo's? Till you come outside, end quote. Every instinct in my 7-year-old body screamed that something was wrong. I jumped off the couch and ran to the guest bedroom where I had been sleeping. I slammed the door shut and locked it before diving behind the bed. For a few seconds, everything was silent. Then I heard it, the sound of someone trying the back door. The handle rattled. Once, twice, then violently. The man had gone around the house. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. The rattling turned into banging, then thumping. The entire house seemed to shake as he threw his weight against the door. I remember squeezing my eyes shut and praying for it to stop. Then, out of nowhere, I heard my grandmother and Appo's voice. Loud, angry, furious. End quote. Get the hell out of my yard, end quote. The banging immediately stopped. I rushed to the window and saw my grandmother marching toward the house while pointing at the man. The stranger sprinted toward a rusted pickup truck parked nearby and sped away before she could get close enough to read the license plate. My grandmother called the police immediately. Although she couldn't and oppose to remember the plate number, she gave them a detailed description of both the man and his truck. The officers took the report seriously. My mother, however, never trusted my grandmother to watch me alone again. Looking back now, one thought still terrifies me. If my grandmother had returned just 10 minutes later, I may not have survived that afternoon. Years later, after moving into my first house, I experienced something that scared me even more. The house wasn't an Oppos tea special. It was a small place meant for 1 or 2 people. Nothing about it seemed unusual. At first, a few days after moving in, I started hearing strange noises inside the walls. Scratching, shuffling, occasional bumps. The sounds seemed to move from room to room. Sometimes the kitchen, sometimes the bathroom. By the third night, the noises were coming from my bedroom wall. I assumed there was an animal trapped somewhere inside the house. Maybe a raccoon, maybe rats. I figured I and Oppos deal with it later. The next morning, I noticed something strange. I was already running low on groceries. The milk carton was nearly empty. Several snacks I remembered buying were gone. At first, I blamed myself. Moving is stressful. Maybe I and Oppos simply forgotten how much I had eaten. Still, something fell off. That night, I woke up suddenly. Someone was breathing. Not me. Not the house settling. Actual breathing. Slow. Deep. Human. I sat upright in bed. The sound stopped instantly. I switched on the lamp and looked around the room. Nothing. No movement. No explanation. Eventually, I convinced myself I had imagined it and went back to sleep. The following day was unbearably hot. For the first time since moving in, I turned on the air conditioning. As I walked through the house, I noticed something odd. Several vents wearing and Oppos tea blowing any air. One of them was directly beside my bed. Curious, I grabbed a flashlight and looked inside. There was no ductwork, no vent system, nothing. Behind the metal grate was simply an empty cavity inside the wall. It looked as though someone had removed the ventilation system entirely. At the time, I assumed it was some strange construction issue. I had no idea how important that discovery would become. That night was miserable. Without proper air conditioning, my bedroom felt like an oven. I tossed and turned for hours, flipping my pillow, changing positions, trying desperately to fall asleep. Then I heard the breathing again. Only this time, I was fully awake. There was no possibility I had imagined it. The sound was real, and it was close, very close. I slowly turned my head toward the vent beside my bed. The breathing stopped. My heart nearly exploded. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to run. Instead, I reached for my flashlight. With trembling hands, I switched it on and pointed the beam into the vent. For a split second, I couldn't and Oppos to understand what I was seeing. Then it moved. A face. There was a face inside the wall. A human face staring directly back at me through the narrow gaps. The first thing I noticed were the eyes. Wide open, unblinking, reflecting the flashlight like an animal hiding in the dark. Watching me. Maybe watching me for days. Maybe for weeks. I dropped the flashlight and screamed. I didn't in Oppos. T grabbed my phone. I didn't in Oppos. T grabbed my wallet. I didn't in Oppos. T grab anything. I ran. I bolted out the front door and didn't in Oppos. T stop until I was halfway down the street. The police arrived shortly afterward. What they discovered was worse than anything I had imagined. A dangerous homeless man had been living inside the hidden spaces within my walls. He had apparently found access through a crawl space beneath the house. For days, maybe longer, he had been moving through the walls while I slept. Listening, watching, waiting. The missing food? He had been stealing it. The breathing? It was his. And the face I saw through the vent. That wasn't in Oppos. The first time he had been looking into my bedroom. It was simply the first time I caught him,